Hi, welcome to the XY Chromies, Confidently Uncertain, a show where two Army vets turned renewable energy engineers discuss veteran issues, science, geopolitics, and everything in between. I'm your host, Pearson Guest. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Richard Ellis. How's it going today, Richard?
Good to talk to you, Pearson.
Yes, it is. All right. Today's episode is episode 15, or 14. 15, Project 2025, Part 2. Look at that. Uh, And we just got done filming the episode right before here. That's why I got all discombobulated. But anyways, we're going to jump right back into it. Before Richard left us with a cliffhanger, we were just getting right into the weeds of the part of Project 2025 that goes over veteran affairs. So the part that hits home to you, me, and probably some of our viewership, hopefully at this point. Um, as well as my mom.
Yeah.
Hi, Mom. Shout out to you. Uh, hope this is finding you and your friends well. I know that you have proliferated this video amongst them, and they are now watching. So, hello, and we appreciate the views and so on. So,
And greetings to our audience, whoever you may be and wherever you are. Good day to you. And I was getting very passionate at the end of our last video.
yep.
Expect more of that. Here we go. So,
Okay.
in our last session, I talked about how to get to Project 2025 and look at the document if you'd like to. I think it's wonderful that the conservative movement has done this for America. It's one of the greatest blessings they've actually given us is the ability to actually look at their deranged doctrine
Yep.
and kind of test how we feel about it. Because I think that there is a very clear vision in the modern white Christian nationalist conservative movement that has a very clear understanding of what outcomes they want from their doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't really address the unintended consequences of what their doctrine also can cause, which is wide-scale human suffering and misery, which it will cause that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really that important because one of the main ideal outcomes, the part that they are keeping a little bit quiet now, is a massive class and financial separation of American citizens. It's the idea of elevating an aristocracy and depressing everyone who's not fit to be in that aristocracy. And you know who you are. In fact, I'm about to describe one of the American demographic populations that this doctrine truly seeks out to eliminate. So I'm talking about the Veterans Affairs needed reforms. This is one of the chapters in Project 2025, which is a very well written document.
Oh, well, before they did say
It's
they
very cogent.
really cared about veterans. They did say that at the beginning. So
Yes,
right off the bat, I felt
they really
really.
do.
I just want to mention they were like, "We love you, and you don't
They
need to
really do.
follow your patriarchal bureaucracy anymore. Your daddy bureaucracy. No, no, no. You don't need to follow him. You need to follow God." Oh wait, they didn't say that part yet, but I have a feeling that might be coming up. So
Yeah, stay tuned. Don't worry. Now, the document's laid out, like I said, in a very cogent and I, I'm I'm super impressed by the formatting of this document. I just keep saying it over and over again. You
all right.
gotta be good at this stuff to write this much material. So
They're
I had
just
read the mission statement,
lawyers.
and I
They're good lawyers. Good lawyers can write good
yeah,
documents. These are just good lawyers. That's
I'm telling you.
yes. Anyways. Okay, go ahead. So,
But by the way, this is an example of one of the ways that I would love to affect our university curriculum. There's a lot to teach in college. One of the things I would love to teach is more of the disassembly of publications. Like reading through scientific publications are pretty dry and boring, but this would be amazing to read through in a critical thinking class.
God, yeah, amazing, terrifying. You'd be like, "Hey, we're going to be reading some horror today. It's 900-page book called Project 2025. Just turn to the page
Yeah,
that you identify most with." Like
right,
literally,
exactly.
Jesus. Yeah, that's funny.
So
Okay.
this chapter is broken down from a mission statement, an overview. I'm not going to read the overview. It's good. There's a lot of great stuff about departmental history and so forth, and what the VA does, and the like they're looking into the future of what the demographics of veterans are going to become. Like that matters to this coalition. So after that background, we get into needed reforms. Needed reforms.
Okay, here we go.
Here we go. Now, Pearson and I are going to benefit a great deal from these needed reforms. Are you ready?
I don't even know.
first
By the way,
one-
I just want to say I have not seen this section yet. I have no idea what you're about to say. My butt's puckered up because I'm prepared to be taken advantage of. Just saying. Okay. Anyways.
All right. Rescind all departmental clinical policy directives that are contrary to the principles of conservative governance, starting with abortion services and gender reassignment surgery.
Of course.
Neither aligns with the service-connected conditions that would warrant VAs providing this type of clinical care, and both follow the left's pernicious trend of abusing the role of government to further its own agenda.
That damn left.
This reform doesn't improve veterans' outcomes. It's just agenda.
Yeah.
And what it does is it lays out who we don't like. We don't like people who abide by policy directives that either reassign gender or result in abortions. We don't like them.
Sure.
So that's clear. This document does not like people. Let's see, how would you put that?
Exercising
their sovereign right to their reproductive health.
Yeah, I was about to say their rights to their
they
body.
They do not like that.
Yeah, no,
they don't like that.
They don't like when
the sovereign right
yeah.
to do.
Yeah,
they like a sovereign right to do unto you for reproductive health by their definition, and conformity to gender. They like it when that can be done sovereignly on you, but they don't like you to do it sovereignly. Now, part of what my passionate feelings of this topic go to are the following, and I'm going to talk about incredibly upsetting ideas right now. So brace yourselves.
I'm braced.
When my friends and colleagues were serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, they were subject to the most pernicious, and that's a great terminology from this document, most pernicious forms of warfare of the early 21st century. And those were a thing that we all heard about every day in the news, called an improvised explosive device.
Yeah.
Now, because we've all forgotten about things that happened 20 years ago now.
The acronym is IED, if anybody's putting that together, by the way, real quick. So.
Yeah, that's right. An improvised explosive device is any device that's designed around creating an explosion, a rapid expansion of matter and materials and atmosphere. That's an explosion, rapid expansion, rapid uncontrolled expansion. And it's designed to be triggered either remotely or through some proximity detonation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's an IED. Now, its munition could be ordnance from an actual military, or its ordnance could be, again, more improvisation, because, as we learned, fertilizer can be turned into an explosive. So it can be any number of ways of producing the explosive material.
Sugar, some fertilizer, a couple other things that I won't mention, and it's super easy. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Turns out if you know a little chemistry, you can actually do some pretty fun stuff in the field.
Yeah, or dangerous.
And it's packed into whatever improvised container you need to have the requisite amount of matter, shrapnel, to expand with the explosion. And the triggering device can be as simple as a pressure sensor,
mm-hmm.
a motion sensor, or a cellular telephone. Because it turns out when a cellular telephone is contacted by another cellular telephone, and it starts the process of receiving the phone call and ringing, that's an electric circuit closing. And if that electric circuit is hooked into the improvised device, you get your detonation.
Mm-hmm.
So Americans heard about these every single day of 2004 through 2019, because these are the methods of These are the methods of force that a guerrilla army or a guerrilla force can use against an occupying force. They're effective, they're terrifying. And so one of the primary ways to make an IED in the early part of the campaign in Iraq was to take an artillery shell or a tank shell or some other type of ordnance that would have otherwise been fired out of a rifled barrel and bury it in the ground, hook it up to a cell phone or some other type of triggering device, and set it off.
Yeah, put it in a crossroad.
It's in the ground.
Yeah.
It's in a highway. It's in these bombed out roads that we were driving Humvees and trucks on. It's easy to conceal. There's dead animals on the side of the road. They're easy to drag over the top of a 155 millimeter high explosive artillery shell that's rigged up to blow when a truck drives by. And these munitions caused gruesome injuries, grievous injuries to our service members. But our medical abilities have come a really long way since the beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And it turns out that war casualties, as a consequence of this 20-year-long war on terror, were actually significantly lower than they could have been. It's because as soon as the ammunition went off and it blew up the trucks and the convoy that were around it, then the rest of the combat unit would take position, return fire if they could. Mm-hmm. Usually the people that blew up the munition were gone. They didn't stick around to fight. That's not how you do guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
And so there would be nothing there. They would call in a medevac helicopter. The awesome pilots that fly Black Hawks would swoop in, pick up the injured, dozens of injured men and women. Let me remind you, women serve in our military.
Mm-hmm.
They're often forgot as veterans, and fly them to a field hospital where they would have the initial life-saving surgeries performed on them. This is what's gruesome. They have lost legs and have received massive damage to their pelvic areas. So they're patched up. They're eventually put onto a long-distance aircraft, so they might be put onto a C-17 or a C-5 or something like that. One of these big airplanes. If they're on a medical bed, they're stabilized and they're flown to Europe, where they're then worked on some more, or they're flown back to the continental United States where they're worked on some more. As these service members are treated for their grievous injuries to their legs and pelvis and lower abdomen, the surgeries that were performed on them were perfected in the transgender sex reassignment surgery realm of medicine. That's where these surgeries obtained, that's where the surgeons and the specialists for the plastic surgeons and specialists who rebuilt the pelvic areas of veterans who were blown up in IED accidents or attacks, I should say.
Yeah.
That's where they regained some semblance of a body that was destroyed in their tour of service. And let me tell you, were it not for our country having the libertine approach to civil rights and civil freedoms and body autonomy and sovereign rights over our bodies, then those surgical services would have never been developed in the private sector. I want to say the private sector of medicine. They would have never been developed by plastic surgeons. There would be no school or training or techniques or strategies or medical appliances or devices or any of the assistive machinery that goes into medicine that would allow our friends to have a rebuilt genital tract.
Or their faces too. Yeah. I mean,
that's what gets blown up in an IED attack. And I'm sorry for being so passionate about this, but let me tell you, when you get your dick blown off in war, it sucks. It's bad.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Yeah.
So when we talk about needed reforms, and we talk about how we're going to get rid of anything that conforms to the pernicious left's ideology and agenda, what I just described goes out the door. It's gone.
Yeah.
Veterans can no longer get reconstructive surgery for their pelvic areas that are blown off because we have signed up, we've elected to be part of this military, and we're sent to a place that is not playing by the rules.
Now, I'd like to interject here because people on the right would argue, oh, come on. Well, for veterans, of course, there's going to be different exceptions to the rule and so on and so forth. And like, you're misinterpreting it. What Richard is doing is he's jumping a couple steps ahead. And if you're thinking this way, then you're not thinking ahead. And the idea is when these rules and laws are put out, you're now under an authoritarian regime. If you don't follow certain rules and laws, you get disappeared. That's how this works. They get in Stalin's Russia, there would every week people would just be round up for reasons. Oh, so and so heard that so and so said this about Stalin. Oh, sorry, we got to go round up your pianist or whatever the fuck the person did. That's how it would work. So, when the doctors are interpreting these laws about how they can't affect the genital reconstruction, yes, you would think, of course, they're going to have the nuance to be like, well, that's not what this is. It was blown off. I'm not reassigning their surgery. No, they're going to be like, well, the law's a little bit too ambiguous for me to take this chance. I could be killed if I make this decision. That's what this regime is going to do. So when you start to go, oh, there's nuance and there's ambiguity, authoritarianism is opposite to ambiguity, the same way ideology and idealism is kind of opposite to nuance and ambiguity. These are extremes, they're absolutisms. There is no middle ground or gray area, or it's up to the interpretation of the authority at the time, whoever is looking at your case. What if you just happen to have a very nice caseworker who he doesn't send you to the gulag or wherever, Guantanamo, Gulag Bay, that you go to? But these are the thoughts that will be happening under this different Project 2025. It's a different mindset. You have to change your mindset from the American mindset and the freedoms that are afforded to you and start thinking how it will actually be with these new laws and structures. So go ahead. What other reforms are we getting, Richard?
Well, before I move on to the next
sorry.
ones,
Yeah.
and I want to be careful not to just read them line by line because the audience can read it themselves. I just thought I would mention the very first thing on the tin.
Okay.
You know, it's about attacking people's sovereign right to their bodies, and this idea that what's been pushed together has been how Americans over the last century have gradually gotten more and more sophisticated with taking that to greater and greater extremes. And these extremes do not map onto the hegemony that this type of nationalist government wants to have over our persons. And so help me God, it's because there are Americans who woke up one day and realized that their misery, their life misery could be solved by having a doctor attach a phallus to them. It is because of those people that basically put themselves on point and headed off into the unknown to have plastic surgeries performed on them that were being tested out on them. Braver than I am, frankly. It is because of them that there is modern medicine that can reconstruct human beings that didn't choose to have that modification done to their body by a bomb that blew up under their truck. And so reconstructing the ureter and the genital equipment and putting
the ball prosthetics,
again,
you see all the scrotal, replacements and all that stuff. Like, it's all, it's advanced.
Believe me, people think about it way too much already, but they don't think about it not being there. And when it's not there, guess what? It's not cosmetic. It's a problem, and it's a problem in ways that we just don't quite get until you actually, how should I put this, roll a mile in that wheelchair's wheels,
Yeah.
because what's been taken from them can only be partially put back with the medical science that we currently have. And that is because of this gradual trend in transsexual medical treatments. Now, I did mention in there that women are getting harmed in these confrontations. Now, they have the same reconstructive needs that the men do, same in the way of the area of the body and the functional qualities of those of the pelvic area. But the part that I told you this was going to get rough, the part that we often forget about our women who serve in the armed forces is that they're not universally safe from sexual assault while they're serving, while they're in training, while they're deployed, while they're back on redeployment back home, and while they're veterans. In fact, we may have touched on the topic earlier in our series where veterans tend to fit kind of a demographic of Americans that might have actually been harmed before they entered the armed forces. They might have had their sovereign right to their bodies violated by someone else already. And
Probably with
oftentimes
people
that
close
means,
to them. There's a
yes,
good
and
chance it was
oftentimes
someone
that
they know
means
very well. Anyway, sorry. Yeah.
that what's happened to them has been this sinister and diabolical problem with our neurobiology, which is, and I've talked about this with the polyvagal theory, sexual assault victims freeze. They freeze. Their nervous system is structured around this as one of the defense mechanisms. And in those assaults, you get unwanted pregnancies. Now, I'm not calling out all of the women who I've ever served with and saying they're all sex abuse survivors. What I'm saying is that the statistics in our population are very high.
Hmm.
And no one talks about the sexual assault that happens to female service members and veterans. It is a totally undiscussed topic. It is appalling, of course. You can tell I'm animated and horrified by it. And occasionally, women who are veterans have unwanted pregnancies from sexual assaults that they need reproductive health to help them take care of. And their one clinical location, in many cases, is the VA. They don't have access to some other reproductive health organization. So if we go ahead and radicalize the Veterans Affairs and the VA Health Administration, we have just thrown a not insignificant number of American veterans into the conservative trash heap. What we've said is, you do not matter in this new paradigm. You can just suffer the consequences of the abuses that have been brought upon you throughout your life. And this is
So,
an appalling idea to me. And that's the first needed reform.
so some extra flair to the reform. On top of that, so what's already happened too? Conservatives initially were like, "Hey, we're going to take it to the state level. It's okay. We're not doing a federal ban or whatever." Even though Trump is like, "I'm definitely going to, put a federal restriction on it and then get rid of it altogether." What am I talking about? He's king now. They'll just make abortion illegal, So that's what will happen now. Um, there's no doubt in my mind about it. But already the argument that they made, or the concession they made when Roe v. Wade was undone, is, well, don't worry. If they really want to get an abortion, they can go to another state, and so on and so forth. And so
Yeah.
the VA under Joe Biden said, okay, well, we're going to pay for people who are service members in a lot of these states who have a lot of bases, by the way, where abortion is illegal, essentially. They
Yeah.
can go to the nearest state that allows for it, and the VA was going to pay for this. Now, this was very recently, like, I think, struck down or gotten rid of last month or something, or this is what Tommy Tuberville wanted, essentially. I think this is why he held up the Senate confirmations of military top brass for almost, what, a year or two. Um, so they argued you could go to another state, and then they shut it down so that service members no longer could go to another state to do it, because yeah, so they're already like this Project 2025. I mean, they've already started to take all the different steps needed to start to enact these. This is in line with their agenda. This is in line with their vision. Everything here seems very consistent. So we shouldn't be shocked. And I'm not, frankly, that shocked at all. I'd like to hear more reforms about how we're getting effed over. Could you highlight us with some new ones?
So the next section is about community care, and the the boilerplate on this is great because it gets into, well, the Trump administration did this wonderful thing for vets, and you know what the Biden administration did? It done watered it down. Look what they did against the vets. And so that's part of reading a document like this, is reading through it and going, oh yeah, that's right. Usually the bias is hidden. That's the whole point of
So
this, is that the bias
yeah,
right up front.
yeah, it's right in front. So what did Trump do that was wonderful, and then what did Biden do that watered down? I'm curious what the
The
interpretation is
Trump
here.
administration made community care part of its veteran-centric approach to ensure that veterans would be able to participate more fully in their health care decisions.
Okay.
The and have options if or when the VA was unable to meet their needs. So the
Oh,
idea is,
privatizing our
well,
healthcare.
what we're going to do is make it so that, well, if you can't get to a VA hospital, the way this is sold is, well, then what we can do is just give you more options so you can go to your local clinic and get health care. That's the idea.
Oh, cool. It sounds great. What's the problem with this, Richard?
Oh, I'm a very passionate man when it comes to this.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm playing coy, but I can't help it right now. So, yeah.
The Biden administration has watered down that effort, has sought various procedural ways to slow the rate of referrals to private doctors, and at some facilities is reportedly manipulating the community care access standards required by the VA Mission Act of 2018. If the makeup of Congress is favorable in 2025, the next administration should rapidly and explicitly codify VA Mission Act access standards in legislation to prevent the VA from avoiding or watering down the requirements in the future. Now, again, this has that sauce, that delicious sounding sauce of giving vets more options.
Oh, yeah. Options. Tell me more about these options.
First and foremost, a Veterans Bill of Rights is needed so that veterans and VA staff know exactly what benefits veterans are entitled to receive, with a clear process for the adjudication of disputes, and so that staff ensure that all veterans are informed of their eligibility for community care. So
Oh
I
no, I have
don't
a
even know
Bill
if
of Rights and now I have
I,
eligibility, not beyond me being a veteran and the process of me being injured. Now I have to go through my Bill of Rights and I need to see if I'm eligible. Oh shit. Is this going to be my ideology test that I have as I'm getting out? Like, hey, do you still love us? And you won't speak ill of us and you worship Big Daddy Trump, right? Like, oh, anyways.
place your hand on the Levitican Bible. Place your right hand here.
Hmm.
Do you solemnly swear
No, there's a Trump
to
Bible
abide
now.
by
There's a
the
Trump Bible
standards?
now, so it's going to be on
Oh,
that one. He,
I forgot. It's not the Levitican Bible. It's the Trump Bible. Yes, of course, the gold-plated one.
yeah, the one that he
So I don't
sells
know
to.
what
Yeah. Anyways, go ahead. Yeah.
community care is. Like I could go look this up, and I will, so that I can talk more informatively about it, because I probably will need to know, because it will definitely affect what I have access to as a vet in the future when this inevitably goes into practice.
Yeah.
But it's a euphemism. I want to say to the audience, these are euphemisms. Community care is a euphemistic statement.
Yeah.
It's meant to be a nice sounding thing that covers up. I just had that thought, like, oh, we all read 1984 and Animal Farm in high school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, community care just makes us more equal than other equal animals on the farm.
Yes.
That's what community care is. It's just another euphemism. And
All
so
I can
you're
tell
right.
you
When
is,
we talk
yeah.
about Bill of Rights for care, and these things that are like, oh, I bet they mean to really improve my quality of care, my access to care, and like how much it costs me to like get medical treatment and so forth. The preamble to this actually talks about the shifting demographic of veterans. Someone realized we get old,
Mm-hmm.
and we go from being 20 and 30-year-old disabled vets to being 60 and 70-year-old disabled vets to being 80-year-old disabled vets. And wouldn't it be nice if we created a smaller bureaucracy that made it less expensive for veterans to get health care? And by that I mean nothing so cynical as making it so that a 75-year-old disabled vet couldn't get health care. I mean, that's beyond the pale. But putting into place codicils, restrictions, um, not diffractive, like deflecting ways of deflecting people and
Yeah.
setting up the bureaucracy. So what it does is it contains as opposed to uh, assists.
Yeah.
And so that's what's going into this. And again, the audience doesn't need me to read this word for word. I just want to talk about the idea that there is doctrine here that covers veterans affairs and veterans health that in the first clause uses a bunch of ambiguous and euphemistic language, in some cases, a patriarchal bureaucracy apparently is a terminology, and then gets into the specifics where it says, oh, and by the way, anything to do with your genitals, the VA can't touch because that is a liberal agenda. It's pernicious liberal agenda.
Yeah.
Even though, as I just laid out for the audience, veterans have a need for pelvic care in ways that the public does not understand and does not appreciate and doesn't know about, because very few people go out and talk about how they need pelvic care after what would have been a life-ending service-inflicted injury.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, it lays out in uncertain terms that they will be creating a new set of guidelines. That's what a veteran Bill of Rights is, that will allow them to restrict access based on whether you meet the criteria of those guidelines. It, I guess, could be ambiguous to an idiot, but the implications, as Dennis from Always Sunny in Philadelphia would say, are all I need right there. So what's next? Let's move on to the next one. We don't need to dwell on it.
By the way, I'm on page 7 of 15, so I'm only halfway through, and I think it's a good idea to just recognize that this goes from policy changes or needed reforms, in that's what I've already covered. It gets down to budget, and so it talks about
how much they'll slash it.
Essentially, I mean, it always sounds good. Like, oh, this conduct an independent audit of the VA similar to the 2018 Department of Defense audit to identify IT management, financial contracting, and other deficiencies. Again, like, hey, what a good idea. This is great.
I bet you they find a bunch of waste.
What if audits caught holes in the IT infrastructure that compromised our data? What if audits found ways that we could stop using this product and use this one because it was better, cheaper, faster in every way possible? This was just part of the bureaucratic inertia. Like, okay, that'd be great. And what if what if all these audits came up with all these improvements? All right. But when the document already is unambiguously critical of
partisan
and absolutely biased, then when I read something about an audit, I go, okay, so what that is about collecting the data on what the VA has been doing, figuring out where to, and I'm going to use a term here. We usually use it for districts, for congressional districts. It's called gerrymandering. It's where you kind of parcel out all the pieces that you don't like because they don't fit your agenda or your ideology, and then you attack those. And what's interesting about doing that gerrymandering is that sometimes this thing that you don't like because it fits a liberal agenda is tied so closely to this thing over here that you don't mind. It's fine. It's fits your agenda. It's just that when the two are separated, they don't work. They break.
Yeah.
They break because that's not how these systems work. They break because biology isn't ideological. Ide- biology
Ideological.
isn't an ideology.
Yeah.
And veterans are made up of biological organisms. We've talked about a lot in our forum here. We're just we're sophisticated creatures that don't our needs don't map on to a perverted idea of what the Bible says. Our needs map onto our biology, which you can't gerrymander into separate pieces and isolate out the rotten parts that you think are rotten.
Well, that's because we're religious warriors for righteousness. Our job is to die for them. Maybe procreate on our way out some more soldiers to be traumatized and factorized for whatever meat grinder of war they want us to go on. And I assume some holy crusades eventually would be the motive. Um, but yeah, I mean, like, so all of this tracks, it's funny when Richard says, well, let's move on to this budget. And I just callously quickly go, well, how much are they going to cut it by? Because, I mean, these are easy predictions to make based off of just what you've seen if you've understood the conservative movement, the Republican Party, and where their alignment has gone. Um, So clearly, yeah, they're gonna want to slash all government spending, and if it's spending, it should be packing the aristocracy. Any government spending that's happening is packing the aristocracy's
Yeah.
wallets. I wasn't joking when I said all the Bibles that will be sworn on throughout the entire government will be Trump Bibles. They will. And they will have
Yeah.
been purchased at a premium for this really juicy contract because, of course, our great infallible leader, Trump, he is the God King. You must buy a Bible. Everybody in the house, the family should actually, in the households, everywhere in the country should have a Trump Bible in their household. And during our mandatory audit sessions to check um, your creds to see if you're falling within your own personal what they call your veteran what's the checklist that they had of your Bill of Rights, your personal Bill of
Yep.
Rights that they'll be giving to you based on your citizen type. You'll have requirements that need to be serviced, and I'm sure all the structures of government will be paying all types of oligarchs for those services that we must have to be a good citizen. These are how these things work. By the way, if you weren't sure, I think we mentioned. It was funny. You mentioned going after these organizations and how corrupt they could be. I said I bet you they'll find waste the audit. So the reason I said
Yeah.
that was because um, there's like a dictator's playbook. In case anybody didn't know, these are like typical traits that you can see within how a government, or maybe not a dictator, authoritarian playbook of how a government becomes authoritarian or a dictator seizes authoritarian control of a government. Um, and what they do is a lot of auditing at first, by the way, or they root out corruption. And
Mm-hmm.
the trick is it's always legitimate to begin with. People are like, oh, great. Yeah, we do need to root out waste or corruption. That makes sense. Great. Our new leader comes in. And typically they do. You can actually root out the corruption that doesn't fit within your own ideology first. That's usually what a dictator leader does. They go after actual corrupt officials that are opposed to them right off the
Mm-hmm.
bat.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Mm-hmm.
ignore all the ones that support them.
Yep.
And they'll do this and usually this is within the media apparatus first is the first thing they will consolidate and start rooting out corruption within that area. Um, and they'll work their way up through the systems of bureaucracy. Xi finished that recently. If you saw him cart off a couple members um, in the last 4 years during parliamentary sessions or whatever they call it in the People's Republic of China, um, he had the last vestiges of resistance carted off. And they weren't resistance; they were actually his most staunch allies. But when you work your way through the corruption, they're the last. They're the corrupt friends you ignore for so long, because they're in your best interest. But eventually, you can root them out, and it's just another sweep of corruption. So this is how this works for the VA when they're going. These audits are going to happen looking for waste. Waste means they're there to cut and slash and burn this program because the conservative movement doesn't believe in government spending or big government programs or government waste.
So one thing I would like to mention, and that is that I think that every human institution and enterprise can aspire to be better than it is today. It can improve.
Sure.
And I would be willing to bet that the VA, the VA that you and I know and love, I bet that there is room for improvement within the administration, from the senior most director down to an orderly working at the VA hospital to someone who's verifying VA benefits for education.
Sure.
I bet that everyone could be 10% better at something.
Sure.
And that bureaucracies do tend to have they're easy to hide a broken bit long enough for someone to benefit from the break. Like that's definitely part of bureaucracies.
Oh, for sure.
And that is why what you just said, playing into the dictator's handbook, this is the reason why it's very easy to get behind these things. And if you so a consequence of liberal education at universities is critical thinking. And critical thinking is bad for ideology and for conservative doctrine that means to take away individual sovereignty. Critical thinking gets in the way of that. And what Pearson and I are hopefully doing and demonstrating in our conversation that goes on from episodes, many episodes into the future, is that we bring critical thought to things that we look at in the world. I'm not a reactionary liberal Green Party leftist.
Nor am I.
I would
I'm a
call
gun-toting
myself a
Democrat.
Yeah, I would call myself a conservative in a different, less perverted world. But it's things like this that I cannot abide by because my idea of conservatism doesn't just so this is a trite statement. We've heard it since the Bush administration. They want to shrink government just big enough to fit into your bedroom. And I am the type of conservative that wants to shrink government so that the best possible outcomes are created for the citizens of that government, for the citizens of that country. The best possible outcomes are created for the coalitions that country can participate in national defense and security. That's the type of conservative I'm talking about, not this. This represents an ideological approach to disinfecting our civilization of undesirable people with undesirable ideas that go against a perverted biblical idea of government. That's what this is. And that's what I keep coming back to. When I talked in our last episode about my definitions of what a white Christian nationalist government is, this conforms to that. This sets that up. The unintended consequences for people who would read this and think, oh, this is a great idea. I mean, of course we need to do better job. We can always improve our government agencies. The unintended consequences for this are the people on the margins first. They're the ones that are affected first. And then it gradually creeps. Once the margins are dealt with, then you get into the center of the demographic or the population or the group of people for whom this administration exists. Part of the reason why Pearson and I are kind of amateur history buffs in this forum is because we educated ourselves on the consequences of an American system of government and civilization where there was no protections for veterans. That is the early 20th century. That is the Hoovervilles after World War I. That is veterans being lied to and being cheated, and that's veterans being ill-treated by our government. The modern VA is the only version of the VA in its history that's ever actually taken care of us in any
Yes.
way possible, under any metric you can actually think of.
Only
Because
really for
up
the
until
last 20
recently,
years. I mean, really. I mean,
yes,
like before that, it was laughably pathetic. And the way that veterans were treated up until really the last 20
God,
years by our citizenry even and the government was laughably pathetic. And I will say, I mean, the VA improved leaps and bounds even within my 5 years of service, like my 5 plus years, it was like 5-ish years of service, it improved over that span remarkably. It improved from George Bush era through the Obama era. Like there was a lot of improvement through that. I mean, because I remember the George Bush VA was a nightmare at first, and then it got better towards the end of his term. And then Obama inherited some more messes. There was some bureaucratic logjam for a while, and then it got better by the end of his term as well too. I remember I was in the second part of that cycle, not the George Bush era VA. That would probably be yours. Um,
mine. That's my VA. That's
so,
that
but
is the
they
VA for which
even
I.
within our two service iterations
Mhm.
over a decade at least worth of time served between that, there's a quite a bit of improvement that's happened even there. I would argue so.
We have a we have a vastly better understanding of the diagnosis and consequences of post-traumatic stress disorder. We have a vastly
I
better
remember that.
understanding of how to treat injuries inflicted on the battlefield from improvised explosive devices. We have fundamentally better systems for accessing our educational benefits. These are entitlements that veterans earned serving our country. And there, people like myself did not go into the armed forces thinking that I would be owed anything from it. I came from a family system that suggested that maybe I was essentially good enough for being cannon fodder and not a whole lot else. It is unbelievable that we have come as far as we have in the last 124 years to go from a government system that ostensibly looks after our veterans and takes care of them in the old veterans home to the systems of entitlements and benefits that we're afforded now that are coming much closer to reflecting on the value of our service to our country. And not only that, we have more to aspire to. I don't think Project 2025 is an aspirational vision for the Veterans Affairs Administration or the Veterans Health Administration. I think that what it does, based on what I've read so far to you, our audience, it suggests to me that it's governed by, um, first, ideology, second, the political machinations of the last 8 years, and finally, it would be built around this idea of one, fealty to the dictator, fealty to the president, and two, that specific forms of care would be deleted from the health administration's matrices of options because they didn't fit an ideological system. And
So
these are very upsetting ideas.
first off, those cares are just the beginning. You think that's the beginning? Like
Right.
this is the
Yeah.
outline, right? This is a document to be built upon, I am sure, and progressed,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
just like everything else. It's a system of taking things away, a systematic approach. Look at what the Supreme Court has done with Roe v. Wade, undoing um, the affirmative action. I mean, one after another, they're undoing our Constitution, they're undoing our civil liberties, they're undoing our rights, they're undoing the powers of our government. They are undoing our government to build a new thing. And, my education comes from my service. And I got that. I joined
Likewise.
to get my education because I saw the 2008 housing crisis that occurred, And I did not see a path forward in this America to have the American dream, smirk, smirk, without getting that education. And I saw military service as a way to do that. This Look at the burn pit issue that Jon Stewart fought for so long, and look at the Republicans who time in and time out, the Republican Party voted against this bill over and over and over again. This is what they think of you. It's crazy to support the party that wants to destroy what you represent, because you're no longer of use to them after you have served your time. That is the way the Republican Party looks at you. The way you should die during service. It would be much better if we were the meat grinder like Russia to them, because we are a financial burden to them. They want us to die a hero's death. They would prefer that. That would be ideal financially for them. And to think anything else, you are being duped by either yourself or your community. You've duped yourself into believing these lies. You've duped yourself into believing Donald Trump cares about you. He could give a fuck about you. He laughs at the idea of your existence. When he asked John Kelly why his son would choose to serve, this is a stupid decision. Why did these people choose to do this? This is so stupid. That's how he talks about you. That's what he thinks of you. And guess what? If you support him, he thinks it double. He must laugh at how dumb you must be to support him. I wonder, anyways, I don't know what else to say about
You've
that.
been very passionate. You and I have been very passionate today on our broadcast.
You know, I'm reminded of
The audience thought
Plato's.
we were just going to talk about brains.
I'm reminded of Plato's allegory, once again, the cave. And you feel like, sometimes I feel like I'm talking to the people who are looking at the shadowy figures. And I'm like, it's an illusion. It's an illusion, you assholes. Mm-hmm. And it's illusion it would be fine if it was misrepresenting something and it was mundane, but it's led you to a life of darkness and misery. And you're not even aware of how miserable your life is. So much so that you're rejecting me trying to say it could be better. And so, no, you're crazy. Our misery is awesome. You're the one who's wrong. In fact, we want to inflict our misery upon you. And it's like, hold on, like that's what always blows my mind. And the idea that trans people en masse are walking around in middle of Wyoming, wherever, fucking going to your diners or whatever and causing a ruckus. These things aren't happening in the real world. And if they are, they're the most isolated incidents you could possibly imagine. The fact that you're so afraid of someone who poses no real threat to you. Like, they don't pose any threat to you. There's nothing threatening there. They just want you to call them by something else, right? Like, I prefer to be called Pierce, I guess. But I mean, it's barely a preference. Richard likes to be called Richard instead of Rich. These are preferences. Now, I could ignore it and be disrespectful to him if he's like, hey, I prefer Richard. And I'm like, okay, Rich, gotcha. Like, I could be that asshole, but like, it's about mutual respect of like just a human person. He prefers to be called this thing. If he happened to be called a they, would it annoy me? Probably my brain, because I'm used to saying something that way, but I would get over it and, move on with my life and call the person the they that they want to be called, or the whatever it is. It's not that big of a deal. Like, to act like this is infringing upon your freedoms while you infringe upon my freedoms is the ultimate form of gaslighting. There's no law that says you have to call somebody that name, by the way. No one is actually infringed upon this. It's just our social constructs have started to put pressure on you to, hey, maybe think that this person wants to be called something different. That's what's happened to you. Literally, social pressure has happened to you. No real power has been inflicted upon you. And yet the Republican Party is trying to inflict power upon us.
So, I haven't really crafted this idea that I'm about to express very well. So if it comes off clumsy, my apologies. And that is to say that the culture war that's currently going on in our civilization is, it's, I want to call it a test case. I want to call it like, whenever you're going to try to put something out into the, like create a new product, we want to test it in the lab. We want to see at what temperatures it catches fire. We want to see if it fractures in cold and cuts you and that kind of thing. We want to do our underwriters laboratories tests.
Sure.
And so the I don't know if a person who identifies as transgender or queer thinks of themselves as being a person unwittingly walking into the test laboratory, but that's the way that our conservative right is treating them. And the way they're being utilized by this ideological movement is to foment a culture war so that we stop seeing other problems. Because
Stop seeing our freedoms taken away from us, really, is like, well, they're yanking fucking freedoms from us. But yeah, sorry for interrupting.
A person choosing a alternative approach to human life from my approach, because I am just a hermit that, lives alone and thinks critical thoughts about our government. So a person living differently than me, so help me God.
I think you described the Unabomber. No, I'm sure. Just joking. That was a joke.
Hey, the Unabomber didn't dance, all right?
I know. That's right. I know. I'm messing around. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. But a hermit that just thinks critically about the government. It's such a funny description.
I needed to find a bizarre way to define myself, and that was the one I went to. That's why I said this is poorly worked out of my mind.
That's okay. I love it.
But a person who thinks alternatively to a mainstream perspective,
yeah,
they represent the ideal test case for how we can turn Americans against each other. And while we fight amongst ourselves, then the riches and spoils of our great nation and its land can be exploited by the cynical people that have funded this, who have backed this, who have promoted this.
Well, so that, and then on the outside, I mean, so just to cue into the Russian and Chinese disinformation, this is a lot of it has been a psyop done by two other countries so that they can't plunder our country, so that we're so distracted they can plunder the countries next to them, like Ukraine and Taiwan. Keep in mind, everything from COVID misinformation to all this gender dysphoria, blah, 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 all this stuff comes a lot from freaking Russia, and it's proliferated by Chinese bot farms. That's it. It's sourced from Russia. China disseminates it in mass through their bot farms on Reddit and Twitter and everywhere else. And, Elon Musk has done a phenomenal job of making Twitter open and free and ready for bots to just come on in and spin the narrative. So, yeah, it's a test case for that. I would say it's always the trans target on their back is just one in the cycle of targets that have gone from them to gay people to black people to women to indigenous people to Japanese, depending on the timeline. There's always to kids, to children, for the love of God. There's always been them who needs to be exploited or used to fight some part of a culture war.
Right.
That is
that
part
culture
of
war. That culture war is designed to keep us squabbling amongst ourselves and to keep us in a state where we'll rat on each other, because this type of authoritarian government will require Americans to rat out our neighbors. That is by design. That's baked into the philosophy. Now, I'm not by me saying this on this forum is not going to cause Americans to wake up and go, "Oh, I get it now. We should form a union and get together and work out our differences." I know
If
that's not going to
only,
work.
if only it were that is easy. You know, Richard, I would say. So it's funny. We've talked about the limbic system and the
Hmm.
polyvagal theory and all these different uh, subconscious mechanisms that dictate a lot of our thought and potentially make determine a lot of our decisions and our reactions to certain things are. And what you're describing is someone is when you say it's by design, essentially what he's getting to is the idea that if your limbic system is highly activated, as we've discussed ad nauseum through some of our episodes, you are not critically thinking. Your prefrontal
Correct.
cortex has been turned off because critical
Correct.
thinking, it might even be painful to you. And in fact, you might be getting dopamine released when you're angry or upset or afraid because the wiring in your brain has gotten jacked up by probably past trauma and a bunch of other undiagnosed shit. So that's what he's getting to at the
Yep.
end of the day is that by design, it would be great if you're always afraid and always angry at somebody and something so
Yes.
that therefore you can't think clearly about anything. And if you're
Yes.
poor, it helps because you're financially oppressed. You're actually even dumber now. Not because you're dumber and because your genes are bad or because you were born dumb, but because you're financially burdened. And therefore, a part of your brain has to think about money all the time, even when it doesn't want to think about money. Trust me, your brain probably does everything it can to avoid thinking about money, like wasting it on alcohol and other things. To make you stop thinking about money and you'll remember it the next day, right? This is the cycles we're talking about. So if you can't relate to this, then good job. You're probably not traumatized. Or maybe you're not in our country and you're like, wow, fuck.
Right.
America. But I mean, sorry to kind of jump on there, but I think that's what you're talking about at the end of the day is this is by design, being
Yeah, you're
activated.
correct. You're
Um,
correct. You are absolutely correct. This doctrine works in the pre-era, the political rallies, the lead up to elections. It works very well then, and once the, um, I mean, this doctrine. I'm pointing at my computer screen.
I
Sorry if it seems
yes,
like I'm just
viewer.
getting off the screen. Uh, this doctrine, what this does is it codifies and institutionalizes the means of maintaining that frightened state in the voting populace. And to sustain that is to wield immense power over human beings. Not to their not to their improvement, not to their sovereign rights or their ideal outcomes for their futures, not to the health of their children. It is a means of capturing human potential in a way that can be controlled easily by a few. That is the idea behind this.
And remember, and now I speak to the Republicans, and maybe even if this ever gets to the aristocracy class of the Republicans or the people who think they will be part of it, the disillusioned that think they will be part of it, who most likely won't, by the way. I don't know what the cutoff is, but I'm guessing it's in the billions to the hundred millions, and the barrier to entry is going to be high and financially taxing and expensive. But this is I want you to the people who think that they will be part of the aristocracy and to the aristocracy itself. Remember, the system you are looking for is full of fear where you live too. You are always will be afraid of the masses no matter what. You will always be
Mhm.
afraid of your neighbor for ratting you out because maybe they're jealous of you. You think all of you sharks up there aren't going to get along and be informing on each other to whoever the leader is at the time after Trump dies, or you won't be afraid of Trump hearing a rumor and just believing it because he's so good at like when he gets new information, he don't worry, he'll process it, right? He'll process it for a long time and think about it before making a rash decision. This is the guy who wanted to nuke a hurricane, right? As it approached, I'm sure he'll come to a good decision when someone's like, "Hey, I heard so and so actually has a flag hidden, or I think their son is gay. Actually, did you hear that?" And before you know it, your whole family is exorcised and your billions are liquidated. You don't think Putin doesn't liquidate billionaires. It's how he's been cashing his bank. Where do you think his war chest is? Well, no one knew that Putin was the richest man in the world. That's because his bank accounts were people. They were oligarchs. He had like 67 killed since this war started. He's cashed 67 oligarch paychecks. A lot of them living in the UK, if you didn't know. If you're uninformed and you don't know what I'm talking about, that's sad. And then you might be voting us into the vision that I'm laying forth. But understand that it's a world of fear, and you probably won't be excused from the masses, because statistically, it's just probably not going to be the case. Those are my dire warnings.
So of all the Project 2025 media I've listened to in preparation for our topic today, I'm feeling pretty good about our passionate reply to it.
I called the White House. I will call my senators. I will call my Congress people and tell them my concerns. I recommend this to anybody else who might be concerned. One thing that I know to be true for the bureaucratic officials or the elected officials even, who are patriots, and I would say the Democrat, much of the Democratic Party, our elected Democratic Party are patriots. Many of them are service members. They've fought. More Democrat politicians have been in the service than Republicans now, which is a funny little flip that's happened over the last 10 years. They value a letter and an email. They value you writing in, because they understand that if you took the time to write something, then it's worth taking the time to consider. And this is something that many politicians throughout our history have held true, these values. Republican and Democratic politicians have always appreciated, many of them have appreciated the words of the people if you took the time to write in. And I think they'll even appreciate a call. It takes time to call and to talk to an aide. And depending on who you're talking to and what side of the branch you might be on, that aide might be a dick to you. I've called Republican people before. Their aides are fucking hostile and dick. They don't want to get calls from citizens. So yeah, I've called those congressmen people too. But talk to somebody. That more than just voting, you do have a civic duty to protect democracy. If you're a veteran, you actually swore an oath to do so and to protect the Constitution until you die, I think. I don't know. I'm pretty sure we vowed that forever. Beyond, that's like one of our duties. Like if I get VA benefits, I need to protect democracy. So,
Well, you and I, as Army vets, we have a pretty short tour on our obligation. It's the Marines that have to do it until they die. Remember, they never stop being Marines.
that's true. Shout out to the Marines out there, all those jarheads. I love you guys. The guys who invented things like Fat Chick Fridays and all the other completely unnecessary and derogatory ideas. I do love you, Marines.
We always take jabs, but I never stop loving my Marine buddies.
They're way tougher than I am, by the way, by far.
Likewise.
Always.
If I have to be engaged in a fist fight, I want a Marine on either side of me.
Yeah. And I don't want them across from me. Either side, but not across. That's what I would prefer. So, yeah, I'll take a Marine. I'll take a Marine from Hawaii. If I wanted fighters with me, I would want 2 Hawaiian Marines, I think. And then I would just step back and let them do the job, and I wouldn't get involved because I would just get in their way. I think that's who I would identify.
What I hope you guys are hearing is that Pearson and I, we
are big pussies.
We fully understand our place in the pantheon of vets. And by the way, we will do whatever it takes to make sure that your status as a veteran is improved. That's exactly what our commitment is to you.
Yeah, I do hope that veterans' lives improve. That is definitely something I do advocate for. I will probably always advocate for, unless we start supporting like the Third Reich or some shit, but it's hard to, I can't say anything absolutely anymore because who knows what the universe time scale is going to throw at us. But it looks like we've gone over the hour. We've been very passionate these last couple days. So these are a little bit longer than our normal hour episodes, but I think that was fine since it's the 4th of July, the birth of our nation, or the representative day of it. Um, Closing thoughts. Let's think of positive things. I like the Marine stuff. I would say, we call the founders the framers sometimes. And one of the brilliant things, I was having a discussion with somebody about it, and they were like, what our framers did is they looked around at the problems of our time, and then they created, laws and rules around that to address the problems of our time. And this was his perspective on the American framers. And I don't know if he's as much of a historical buff, I guess, as I am. And I am a layman buff at best.
Mhm.
I there's so much more history I need to learn before I would even say I would, could play in the field. But this guy was clearly less informed, and I thought that I was like, well, that's how I think a lot of governments go about. When they found a country, they look around at the problems and they try to solve the problems around them,
Mhm.
in good faith. But our framers, what made America kind of a magical place is these people thought about the future a lot. The framers were insanely future minded. And it's the reason why they're probably more revered than other people who started other countries and lauded so much, because they did think about the future a lot. They thought about how they couldn't predict the future in so many ways. And they had to write phenomenal pieces of poetry essentially that
Mhm.
explained this and was magically ambiguous when they didn't dare predict, and they tried to be as pointed as possible when they were certain about things. um, and they set a framework for us to grow and change as a nation, um, forward. Progress is built into American culture. um, when have we ever really been conservative as a country in our ideology? We've always been about doing things to the max, doing it more. Even if it was bad, we're
Yeah.
like, fuck it. We're going to make the decision. We're going to just do it. Because any veteran or soldier worth his salt knows that the biggest enemy is not a bad decision. The biggest enemy is indecision, is doing nothing, is being frozen, and or shrinking away from the problem. And I will say that in American history, we have shrunk away from problems. And by the way, when we do, the outcomes have always been monumental. World War II is an example of us shrinking away from the problem before that. After World War I, receding into ourselves. Fuck, World War I is when we receded into ourselves,
Mhm.
financially, and a whole bunch of economies around the globe collapse on themselves. Now, don't get me wrong. We had those reasons for those recessions, for us looking inward. We had problems to fix during those periods of time. Teddy Roosevelt would tell you all about it, and so would FDR for those periods of time and why we had to shrink. We had a lot of issues to address with. And just like that, right now, Biden and the last administration, even, and the next administration are focusing inward again because
Yeah.
we have a lot of problems we have to fix. It's clear that we have a lot of problems we have to fix. My only hope is that we don't completely ignore the outside world, as it is really scary out there. We have a Cold War to manage. So not only is it important to think about the future, but it's important to think about the present and fight for now, for the future that we want to have. And my future, I just don't want a future rooted in the past, in the 1600s. So,
Yeah, it'd be nice to have modern problems and not problems that we could reflect back on our amateur study of history and recognize clearly, because those problems were less a product of just the forces of nature and much more a product of people's um, willingness to be ignorant or to shrink away or to do nothing or to use excuses that they could fabricate out of their religious texts.
if the conservative movement is to isolate groups and separate us from each other,
Mm-hmm.
um, that usually always ends when people stop talking, because that's what that represents in the most fundamental term. They eventually fight. So just keep that in mind.
Yep.
And more conversations are better than less. So, all right, Richard. Well, I've had a very enjoyable, passionate time talking to you about the potential end to our democracy. I hope that people are sufficient. I hope the Democrats are sufficiently afraid enough to vote. I hope that the Republicans who don't believe in Trump will just sit out of the race. I know most of you can't be asked to vote for Biden, but if you could sit out, that would be great. If you don't like Trump, and the Republicans who love Trump and who want the Project 2025 to happen and are cool with the Supreme Court rulings, go fuck yourself. You're an enemy to my country. You're a fascist. You should have a red coat on or some other outfit on. Maybe go to fucking Russia if you like it so much. But fuck off. You're not a patriot. You hate this country because if you liked it, you wouldn't be trying to completely dismantle it from what it is right now.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, Richard.
It's got to be said.
Hey, man.
Dude, it's been a good talk with you. Glad we got to cover this forum. And maybe we'll have a lighter topic next time.
Yeah, I think I've talked about all I need to talk about this. I've vented. This was cathartic for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to see your progress on Fusion 360, the model that you're creating right now for the Adreno. Wait,
Arduino.
Arduino. Yeah, sorry.
Arduino. It's an Italian word.
Sorry, I'm only dealing with SCADA system HMIs these days, and maybe some PLC boards and remote I/O. Yeah, okay. So I dealing with different control systems out there these days, not the Arduino, but yeah. So I'm excited to see the progress on yours.
Well, I'm excited to show it off next time when we have something, when our topics can be things that are the delight of freedom. The result of freedom, of free economy.
I'm going to want you to send images that I'll post them on the podcast next time so we can show off some cool tech, some real engineering stuff if you don't mind, or if you want to show at least one.
I don't mind.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
All right. It's been real. Have a good 4th. And yeah, dude, we'll see you next time.
Hot dogs and hamburgers.
All right. Bye.